is confirmed. All senators who have bills or resolutions, please bring them to the secretary's desk. You are running out of time. Mr. Secretary, first reading and reference of Senate bills and resolutions, please.
Senate Resolution 648 by Senators Harbin of the 16th and others, a resolution honoring the life of Mr. Ronald Davis and dedicating an intersection in his memory and for other purposes.
Transportation.
Senate Resolution 649 by Senators Harbin of the 16th and others, a resolution honoring the life of Mr. Jerry C. Colwell and dedicating an intersection in his memory and for other purposes.
Transportation.
Senate Resolution 650 by Senators Dugan of the 30th and others, a resolution creating the Senate Study Committee to review education funding.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 658 by Senators Hickman of the 4th and others, a resolution supporting the people of Ukraine during the crisis caused by the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation and for other purposes.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 659 by Senator Summers of the 13th and others, a resolution creating the Senate Study Committee on Unsheltered Homelessness and for other purposes.
Rules.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, first reading and reference of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 849 by Representative Smith of the 41st, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 1975 of the OCGA relating to reporting of child abuse so as to add human
Insurance
resources.
and labor.
House Bill 884 by Representatives Belton of the 112th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to general provisions of professions and businesses so as to change certain provisions.
Veterans, military, and homeland security.
House Bill 1043 by Representatives Disperse of the 11th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 12 of Title 50 of the OCGI relating to commissions and other agencies so as to provide for the creation of the Georgia Endowment for Teaching
Higher
Professionals.
education.
House Bill 1279 by Representatives Gamble of the 15th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 13 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to dangerous drugs so as to authorize certain persons with a chronic
Public
disease.
safety.
House Bill 1280 by Representatives Lim of the 99th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 6 of Chapter 5 of Title 48 of the OCGI relating to municipal taxation so as to revise provisions concerning the duties of county tax commissioners.
Finance.
House Bill 1295 by Representatives Corbett of the 174th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 6 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGI relating to employment under the Quality Basic Education Act.
Education and youth.
House Bill 1351 by Representatives Knight of the 130th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 7 of Chapter 4 of Title 49 of the OCGI relating to Medicaid assistance generally so as to provide for pharmacy benefits management for the Medicaid program to be conducted
Insurance and labor.
House Bill 1357 by Representative Smith of the 18th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 20-2-984 relating to Professional Standards Commission's authority to create.
Education and youth.
House Bill 1371 by Representatives Disperse of the 11th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 31 of the OCGA relating to general provisions regarding health so as to provide for the creation of the
Government oversight.
House Bill 1372 by Representative Smith of the 133rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 25 of the OCGA relating to fire protection and safety so as to revise provisions.
Regulated industries.
House Bill 1381 by Representative Stevens of the 154th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 80 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to general provisions applicable.
Slogo general.
House Bill 1383 by Representative. House Bill 1383 by Representatives Walensky of the 79th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 9 of Title 45 of the OCGA relating to the Fair Employment Practices Act of 1978, so as to provide for hearing before
Special Judiciary.
House Bill 1385 by Representatives Anderson of the 10th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 36 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to annexation of territory, so as to revise annexation reporting.
Slogo general.
House Bill 1396 by Representatives Yerta of the 152nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 32 of Title 36 of the OCGA relating to municipal courts.
Government oversight.
House Bill 1406 by Representatives Martin of the 49th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 36-66-4 of the OCGA relating to hearings on proposed zoning decisions, notice of hearing, non-governmental.
Slogo general.
House Bill 1437 by Representatives Blackman of the 146th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to income taxes so as
Finance.
House Bill 1455 by Representative Hitchens of the 161st and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 52 of the OCGA relating to Georgia Ports Authority so as to provide
Public
for powers.
safety.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, will you please read reports of standing committees?
Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Finance has had on consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation that House Bill 1064 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Huff Stetler, the 52nd District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation: that House Bill 1349 do pass, House Bill 1233 do pass, House Bill 1147 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harper, the 7th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Retirement has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation: that Senate Bill 584 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Robertson of the 29th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation: that Senate Bill 612 do pass, House Bill 1444 do pass, House Bill 1469 do pass, House Bill 1475 do pass, and House Bill 1476 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read bills and resolutions for the second time?
Senate Bill 76 by Senator Albers of the 56th and others. Emergency Communications Authority, Next Generation 911 Systems and Services provide. Senate Bill 171 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others. Safe Communities Act of 2021 enact. Senate Bill 227 by Senator Jones of the 2nd of the 22nd and others. Eminent domain, alternative process for a country, municipality, or consolidated government to condemn certain blighted properties provide. Senate Bill 267 by Senator Robin of the 5th and others. Teachers Retirement System of Georgia retired member who elected an optional retirement allowance eligible to change any of such named beneficiaries provide. Senate Bill 272 by Senator James of the 35th and others. Racial Equity and Reconciliation Commission of Georgia create. Senate Bill 354 by Senator Rhett of the 33rd and others. Annexation notice to residential tenants provide. Senate Bill 468 by Senator Jackson of the 41st and others. Georgia State Indemnification Fund, death by suicide for a public safety officer in certain instances to be considered a death in the line of duty for purposes of indemnification provide. Senate Bill 487 by Senator McNeil of the 3rd and others. Insurance diagnostic breast examination shall not be treated less favorably than screening mammography for breast cancer with respect to cost-sharing requirements provide. Senate Bill 499 by Senator Tibbins of the 37th and others. DNA sampling, collection, and analysis and collection of DNA for individual convicted of certain misdemeanor offenses provide. Senate Bill 504 by Senator Robertson of the 29th and others. Bonds and recognizance, the term bail restricted offense redefined. Senate Bill 512 by Senator Payne of the 54th and others. Gambling, dogfighting, revised provisions. Senate Bill 528 by Senator McNeil of the 3rd and others. Emergency management, the inclusion of barbers and cosmetologists as essential workers in the event the governor declares a public health emergency provide. Senate Bill 532 by Senator Jones of the 25th and others. Black and Blue Fund establish. Senate Bill 535 by Senator Summers of the 13th and others. Reducing Street Homelessness Act of 2022 enact. Senate Bill 536 by Senator Dixon of the 45th and others. Bonafide coin-operated amusement machines. Administrative procedures and actions regarding bonafide coin-operated amusement machines shall be subject to Chapter 13 of Title 50 provide. Senate Bill 539 by Senator Hatchett of the 50th and others. Wiretapping, eavesdropping, surveillance, use of any device to photograph or record patients in a healthcare facility shall be unlawful provide. Senate Bill 543 by Senator Harlan of the 39th and others. Wrongful death. A parent who is determined to be responsible for the homicide of his or her child shall have no right to recovery against the value of the child's life provide. Senate Bill 552 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others. Superior Courts, 8th Judge of the Superior Courts of the Co-Ed Judicial Circuit provide. Senate Bill 553 by Senator Roberts of the 29th and others. Watercraft. Any person 15 years of age or older to operate a Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 vessel authorized. Senate Bill 565 by Senator Strickland of the 17th and others. Sentence and punishment. Any time after conviction, defendant convicted of an offense and sentence as a direct result of being victim of trafficking for a label or sexual servitude may petition the sentencing court to grant relief of vacatur provide. Senate Bill 566 by Senator Burke of the 11th and others. Surprise billing. Consumer Protection Act. A medical or traumatic condition includes a mental health condition or substance use disorder. Emergency medical services include post-stabilization services provide. Senate Bill 572 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others. Taxes on tobacco and vaping products. Attorney General to establish a vapor product directory provide. Senate Bill 573 by Senator Brass of the 28th and others. Hospitals and healthcare facilities. Hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers to utilize surgical smoke evacuation systems during surgical procedures to protect patients and healthcare workers from hazardous or surgical smoke. Provide. Senate Bill 576 by Senator Strickland of the 17th. Grandparents or family members' visitation rights. Provisions regarding visitation actions brought by certain grandparents of minor children. Revise. Senate Bill 577 by Senator Strickland of the 17th. Traffic offenses. Aggressive driving to the underlying offenses for the offense of homicide by vehicle add. Senate Bill 580 by Senator Dolezal of the 27th and others. Ethics in Government. No political action committee which is affiliated with a member of the General Assembly shall seek or accept a contribution or pledge of contribution to such political action committee during legislative session. Provide. Senate Bill 588 by Senator Miller of the 49th and others. Local boards of education. All meetings of local boards of education shall be open to the public except as otherwise provided by law. Provide. Senate Bill 591 by Senator Hatch of the 50th and others. Secondary metals recyclers shall be illegal for certain persons to purchase, possess, obtain, or sell used detached catalytic converters, used utility wire, or used communications copper. Provide. Senate Bill 599 by Senator Hicker of the 4th and others. Reckless conduct, offensive reckless conduct by discharging a firearm. Provide. Senate Bill 601 by Senator Miller of the 49th and others. Georgia Educational Freedom Act, enact. Senate Bill 605 by Senator Burke of the 11th. Employment security. Certain nonprofit organizations have the option of making installment product payments to finance employment benefits paid to its employees for certain time periods during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Provide. Senate Bill 609 by Senator Melissa Fitzgerald and others. Medical cannabis. The Georgia Access to Medical Cannabis Commission is subject to change procurement laws. Provide. Senate Bill 610 by Senator Harold of the 14th and others. Department of Community Health conduct a comprehensive review of provider reimbursement rates for home and community-based services covered by the waiver programs require. Senate Resolution 463 by Senator Gooch of the 51st and others. Joint Study Committee on the Electrification of Transportation create. Senate Resolution 525 by Senator Beach of the 21st and others. Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia ensure that no less of 85% of all early action admissions are awarded to Georgia resident students. Urge. Senate Resolution 546 by Senator Anderson of the 45th and others. Triple Negative Breast Cancer Awareness Day recognizing March 3rd, 2022. Senate Resolution 584 by Senator Jackson of the 41st and others. Maternal Health Mental Health Day recognized May 4th, 2022. Senate Resolution 613 by Senator James of the 35th and others. Georgia Building Authority Act and the State of Georgia ADA Coordinator's Office develop a plan to make Georgia State Capitol Building more accessible for individuals with disabilities. Urge. Senate Resolution 623 by Senator Tippins of the 37th. Election and term of members. Implementation of staggered terms of office for members of the Senate. Provide. House Bill 963 by Representative Parrish of the 158 and others. Controlled substances, Schedule 1 and 4, change certain provisions. That completes the order, Mr. President.
For what purpose does the senator from the 29th rise?
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Senate Rule 4-2.6 be suspended to allow SB 584 to be read a second time.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption?
Senate Bill 584, a bill by Senators Robertson on the 29th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 3 of Article 3 of Chapter 5 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to compensation for county tax officials and administration, so as to require the State Revenue Commissioner to contract with the Board of Employees Retirement System of Georgia to offer certain county tax commissioners the option to participate in a state-administered deferred compensation plan, to provide for a limited state match of contributions, and for other purposes.
Senator from the 29th has asked for unanimous consent that the rules be suspended and that Senate Bill 584 be read for the second time. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and will the Secretary read the bill?
Senate Bill 584, a bill by Senators Robertson on the 29th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 3 of Article 3 of Chapter 5 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to compensation for county tax officials and administration, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Retirement recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Robertson of the 29th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, it's now time for morning roll call. It is now time for morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Imagine that. The senator from the 33rd has his button pushed, and the chair recognizes him.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, y'all. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the following senators for business outside the Capitol. 1, 11, 32, 5, 6, and 22.
Without objection, the senators from the 1st, the 11th, 32nd, 5th, 6th, and 22nd are excused. Are there any additional motions to excuse? Looks like you nailed them all. Secretary will call the roll. Senators, signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. All right, it's now time for a morning devotional. Ask that all senators take your seats and cease all audible conversations. Ask that our doorkeepers secure the chamber, and I cannot help but recognize the good-looking bow tie on the senator from the 28th today. Sharp dressed. Combed your hair and everything today. It's my honor to recognize the senator from the 31st to lead us in our pledge and to introduce to us our chaplain of the day.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. Let's pledge the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Georgia flag. Pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and the principles for which it stands, with wisdom, justice, moderation, and courage. Good morning, colleagues. It's my honor to bring a friend, a brother, a friend of who serves in law enforcement, a faith leader in our community from Polk County, Georgia, Jonathan Blackman. Jonathan is a long-life resident of Cedartown, Georgia. He graduated from Cedartown High School and the University of West Georgia, and I know we have some University of West Georgia grads in the room. He is happily married to his wife, Kelly, who is with us today. For 25 years. He has 2 children, Evie, who is a teacher at Youngs Grove Elementary School, and 16-year-old Brody, and 8-year-old furry pal, Max. Jonathan serves as the current chief deputy and chaplain for the Polk County Sheriff's Department. He is a former youth pastor at 4 churches in Polk County for a combined of 20 years. He is the former pastor of Antioch Baptist Church. He currently serves as the associate pastor of Essential Church in Rome and the Connections Missions Ministry at First Baptist Church in Cedartown. He also serves as the chaplain for the Georgia Sheriff's Association. Jonathan's a very special person to me. When I ran for office, he was introduced from a mutual friend, and I'm going to say our mutual friend's name because he'll give us grief later. Kyle Pinkard, who grew up in Polk County. And when I got to meet Jonathan took a chance on me. We didn't know each other, but we had a lot in common in terms of our family, our belief in the Lord, and our service to our community, and the work that he's done to protect his community and serve in law enforcement. And I've been humbled to be by him and his wife's side and his sheriff through awesome and fun times and also through some of the saddest times I've seen the Polk County community endure with the loss of their friends and other fellow sheriff's deputies. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Blackman.
There's a lot to be said. Thank you, Jason, and I appreciate you and what you do for our area as well as the state of Georgia. So I just want to say good morning. Good morning to our Lieutenant Governor and to our Secretary of State and all the senators here and all the leaders and all the workers here in the Senate. And this is my first time. So before we pray and I read a devotion, I just want to give you a thought to start with. And the thought is for you guys today. Here's the thought. God is fighting your battles, arranging things in your favor, and making a way even when you don't see a way. I know there's a lot of things that get clouded during times when y'all are working, so just know that God's there working. So it's a great honor to be here as chaplain today, and I do thank Senator Jason from our district for this special invitation. So I don't know if you have your Bibles or maybe a Bible app, or just want to make a note of the scripture I want to share with you today, but I think it'd be something great for you to refer to, or maybe even share with another colleague or friend or family member. It's going to be in Deuteronomy Chapter 20. So I'll let you maybe jot that down or find that. Deuteronomy Chapter 20, and we're just going to read 4 verses here. And it says in verse 1, when you go out to fight your enemies, and you face horses and chariots, and an army greater than your own, do not be afraid. The Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, is with you. Now I know our army and our forces look a lot different today, right? Our battles look a lot different. Listen to verse 2. When you prepare for battle, the priest must come forward to speak to the troops. Much like today, I don't consider myself a priest, but I do consider myself a minister of God. And I'm here to prepare the troops of the Senate for what you may face today or the rest of the time here you are at the Capitol. Verse 3, he will say to them, listen to me, all you men of Israel. Do not be afraid as you go out to fight your enemies today. Do not lose heart or panic or tremble before them. Verse 4, for the Lord your God is going with you. He will fight for you against your enemies, and he will give you victory. When I thought about that, here's what Webster says about the word battle. Battle's all over that scripture. Webster says this, battle is defined as a general encounter between armies, ships of war, or aircraft, or an extended contest, struggle, or controversy. What do we see at the Capitol? A lot of that, right? And verse 3 says this, or the example 3 says this, a struggle to succeed or survive. And I'm excited today to know that Georgia has survived. We've had a hard couple of years, but we have struggled and we have survived. I don't know all of you today, but what I do know, about every one of us here, we have one thing in common. Here's what we have in common. We have a battle. It's either going to be one we're coming out of the battle, or it's one we're right in the middle of, or it's one we're heading toward. There's a battle always around us. Our God knows what is behind us. He knows what is beside us, and he knows what is in front of us. And that's what makes his victories easy. He is the only one that can arrange things in our favor, making a way even when we do not see a way. Just as Moses shares here in the book of Deuteronomy with the troops in the Old Testament, as we read these verses, I'm here to remind you today in the Senate that 3 key points of these verses. The Lord your God is with you if you allow him. The second point is do not be afraid. Do not be afraid when you stand with the Lord your God. And the third point, the Lord will fight for you, and he will be the one to give you a victory over your battle. When all I see is the battle, you see my victory. When all I see is the mountain, you see a mountain moved. Let that stay with you. Let me pray for you today. Lord, we just thank you for a door to be open to be here at this great capital in our great state of Georgia. Lord, I thank you for the men and women that come to represent our areas, our hometowns. Lord, the people. Lord, I thank you for their dedication. I thank you for their wisdom. I thank you for their time that they may spend away from their families or their other jobs. Lord, I thank you for what they mean when they stand firm on a bill or law that's trying to move within this capital. Lord, I pray, God, right now that you would go before us every battle, every struggle. Lord, I thank God that you know the end, that you are the one that gives us favor and victory. Lord, help us today to always lean on you and trust you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right, if I could get everybody's attention, if we could all take our seats. Everyone take your seats. It is truly an honor to be able to introduce this great group behind us, and certainly it doesn't take a whole lot of introductions here, but I want to talk a little bit about the Brave season last year. So obviously we see a trophy and we see the championship that we were all so proud to watch happen, but there was so much more that happened last year. With all that's going on in our state, with all the distractions, with a pandemic, it was such a great opportunity for us to really get behind something here in Georgia and to just truly show the country what we were doing here and all the great excitement. To watch the chess moves get made by the front office were just amazing down the stretch. It was just truly unbelievable as a baseball nerd, self-proclaimed baseball nerd, to watch those chess moves get made, those trades, those last-minute call-ups was truly phenomenal. and he gave us all a bright spot. But I want to compliment them on something that was a little bit of a sticky issue. Obviously, we lost the All-Star game. And for me, the part that really amazed me about the Braves organization as a whole was they had two choices when that All-Star game disappeared. They could hang their head and spend the rest of the season complaining about it, or they could put their head down and go win a championship. And I'm proud that they put their head down and went and won a championship. Truly was amazing. Now, because we're the deliberative body and because we're so calculated in what we do here, of course, this is to celebrate the championship, but it's also to celebrate that we're about ready to get back to playing baseball. So we had the intuition that they were going to have the collective bargaining agreement wrapped up yesterday, and here they are. So it's my honor to recognize and to bring forward Derek Schiller with the Atlanta Braves.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us. I'm here with Mike Plant. He's also with the Atlanta Braves, and we just want to say thank you for everything that you do to help support the team. You know, we wouldn't obviously be in this position where we could defend a world championship unless we win the world championship, and we did that with all of your help. Last year was a phenomenal year, and you think about it, you obviously had us coming back from the pandemic. When we started the year, we had no idea that we were even going to have fans in our ballpark. And then to watch the support that all of you and all the rest of our fans had in bringing the team up to their up and everything that happened throughout the whole course of the season was remarkable. And in fact, the success that we had during the course of the regular season led Alex Anthopoulos, our general manager, to go out and make the moves that he made, and ultimately many of those moves were fundamental and pivotal in us winning the world championship. So it's just a pleasure to be here with you. We're really happy that we ended that lockout. We're really happy that we're going to open on April 7th. I hope each of you will join us at Truist Park when we defend the world championship. Thank you very much for having us.
Hold on one second. We've got a resolution that we'd like to we'd like to read. Mr. Secretary, will you please read the resolution?
Senate Resolution 7EX by Senators Bullis of the 53rd and others, a resolution congratulating the Atlanta Braves and for other purposes. Whereas on November 2nd, 2021, the Atlanta Braves claimed their first World Series title since 1995 after shutting down the Houston Astros 7-0, finishing the series with 4 wins and 2 losses. And whereas after securing an early lead, the Braves utilized their superior pitching and landed numerous home runs in order to close out the game. Whereas George Soler was named the 2021 World Series MVP for his outstanding performance, joining the ranks of Hank Aaron, Lonnie Smith, and Ryan Klesko. And whereas the victory gives the city of Atlanta its first major professional sports league championships title since Atlanta United won the MLS Cup in 2018. And whereas the phenomenal performance of the team is a clear indication of the outstanding athletic ability, dedication, hard work, and unity of purpose and spirit of each member of the team. And whereas this magnificent team earned its well-deserved reputation for excellence, and it is abundantly proper to call them champions. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate that the members of this body congratulate the Atlanta Braves for winning the 2021 World Series title and extend sincere best wishes for the continued success on the field and beyond. Be it further resolved that the Secretary of the Senate is authorized and directed to make appropriate copies of this resolution available for distribution to the public and to the press. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Is there objection to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none, and the resolution is adopted. Now, look, I'm between jobs here in a few weeks. So if y'all are looking for a right-handed reliever that's got a good two-seamer and a good slider, I'm in. We're going to bring everybody down here front like we did last week for the other trophy. We're see a trend here. We've got trophies. Bring everybody down front. We're going to take a big group picture if that works. All right, the Senate will come back to order. That was a great time. Are there any unanimous consents? The chair sees none. Does any senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? The chair recognizes the senator from the 38th for a point of personal privilege.
Good morning, colleagues. I hope everybody's doing well today. This is Friday, of course. I want to tell you about a young lady that lives in the 38th District. Her name is Dolores Little. She is a female minority entrepreneur and has a cleaning business, which she's owned for 47 years. She's worked at one point with the federal government in various different capacities. She was married to her husband for 52 years until he passed August of 2013, and she's the mother of two. She has a son and a daughter. She is a member of Mount Olive Baptist Church here in Atlanta. Her pastor is Jimmy R. Gibson. She's been a member for 65 years, where she's currently a member of the Deacons' Wives Ministry, chair of Membership Conservation Committee, member of Women's Ministry, and a member of the Pathfinders Sunday School class. She also has been the Young Adult Coordinator in the church, Office Secretary, Chair and Vice Chair for Women's Day, Church Anniversary, God's Trombone, and numerous program booklet committees. She enjoys family relationships, going on vacations, reaching out to the sick with a smile, helping to provide food for those who are in need, and encouraging those that are low spirit by always pointing them to Christ. She is a native Atlantean. Thank you for listening.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 50th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today just 2 years ago. Today was a big day for all of Georgians and the world. It was the day that the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 an official pandemic. For me personally, it was the day my daughter Hazel was born. So she is 2 years old today, and I just wanted to wish her a happy birthday. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes our distinguished rules chairman for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, Monday will be our last rules meeting prior to crossover. And let me explain something. I'm honored to be your rules chair, and I thank the President of the Senate and the members of the Committee on Assignment for that wonderful task. But let me explain something, how it works. I decide which bills are available, and the members of the committee select them. So if you want a bill that's available, and most of them are, please check with a member of the committee and get them to select your bill if you want it on the floor Tuesday. Also, I'd like to say that we're feeding the Senate and the staff of the Senate with a great Southern lunch with fried chicken and baked chicken for those of you from Atlanta, and collard greens and mac and cheese and some other just wonderful vegetables and peach cobbler. So we'll have lunch from 11:30 to 12:30 on the 4th floor. Monday, thank you. Did I say today, tomorrow, something? It'll be Monday, prior to Rules meeting, and there are many appropriations meetings from December to the 19th, so please attend and enjoy yourself with a wonderful Southern lunch from Oakwood Cafe. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise this morning to recognize this day, March 11th, 2022, as Child Rescue Crusade Day here at the State Capitol through the Senate Resolution 591. High school students from across Georgia were invited to participate in a mock legislative session at the Capitol, and that was a few months ago, to further educate and inspire young leaders and prepare them for the future and their success. It was sponsored by the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and as many of you know, education is a vital component of our state's growth and development, and what better way to further that education than by exposing our students to the mechanisms of government. During the students' time at the Capitol, they discussed and debated topics important to modern middle and high school experience. And the students also had the opportunity to craft legislation, and they did that. And they voted and passed legislation that will be forwarded to the General Assembly to be considered for adoption. Following the adjournment of their mock session, students were gifted with a certificate of completion recognizing their hard work and dedicating contributions to the legislative process. And as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken its toll on all of us in more ways than one, but none more than our students and future leaders of Georgia. Preserving the prosperity of our children is vital, and through the Child Rescue Crusade, public and private school students were given the opportunity to gain a better understanding of the workings of state government, specifically on how a bill becomes a law. I'm honored to have some of them in the Capitol today. I thought they would be sitting in the gallery, and they are all around here and watching us today. So please join me in welcoming these young men and women. And also, I'd like to take a moment to recognize another group that's here with us today, and that's the Good News Church and School from Johns Creek. And they're joining us soon in the gallery. Again, I'm honored to have you all here, young people, if you're listening, and so let's give them still a big Senate welcome and thank them for what they've done and what they're going to do in the future. We're in good hands, y'all. We had some great people. And on your desk, you see the resolution that went out all over the country, and it attached to it was the legislation that mock session of young people of Georgia who came from almost every county participated in. So I thank you very much, Mr. President, and colleagues, thank you for listening. You can join us at 12 o'clock if you want to take a picture with the children on the second floor steps. I yield the will. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 56th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. This Saturday, I will have the great honor with my uncle, Chuck Albers, for celebrating his 50th year in the fire service for the Franklin Square Munson Fire Department. He continues our family legacy so proudly. He served in a variety of different roles and positions, and I'm just so thankful for his mentorship, his friendship, his generosity, and his service to all those in the fire department as well as the community he serves. Again, my sincere thanks and appreciation to my uncle, Chuck Albers. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, just a reminder that Monday morning, I hope you enjoy your weekends. Monday morning, while we're not in session, Appropriation Committee meetings begin at 8 a.m. and run throughout the day. we'll be going over the House's proposal and the governor's proposal on the FY23 budget. So please come early and ready to go. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the majority leader for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. Every time I come up here, it seems like I'm coming up here to admonish somebody about something or another. This is not one of those days. This is one of those days where I come up and say thank you and how proud I am of all the members within the Senate that co-signed that study committee over the summer on enhancing QBE to improve the formula for all of our school kids that are across the state of Georgia. It's time, it's past time, and I am proud that the Senate always puts education of our youth first and foremost. So since I always fuss, I figured I needed to come up here and say thank you. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Any other senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? The chair sees none. You have a consent calendar of privilege resolutions. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to the adoption of the resolutions on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to any bills on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. The questions on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 48, the nays are 0, and the bills having received the requisite constitutional majority are therefore passed. We are now. Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate agree to the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 910.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption?
House Bill 910, a bill by Representatives Ralston of the 7th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act making and providing appropriations for the state fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2021 and ending June 30th, 2022, known as the General Appropriations Act, and other purposes. The House offers the following amendment. Amend the Senate substitute to House Bill 910 by inserting the numbered sections and amounts appropriated therefore as contained in the attached document House Bill 910 Senate substitute as amended by the House, in lieu of the corresponding numbered sections and amounts appropriated therefore as contained in the Senate substitute, which are hereby stricken. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the Appropriations Chairman to speak to his motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, as you know, over the past few weeks, we've been working hard with the House to try to get some agreement as quickly as possible as we could on the FY22 amended budget. And thanks to your help, much of the work that you've done over the past 2 weeks, I think we've reached a point where we can agree to the House amendment. What lies before you now is the House amendment to the Senate's amendment to House Bill 910, the amended budget for FY22. In many ways, it's similar to what you saw when it came over the first time. It still includes the governor's fully funding of QBE and the QBE formula. It still includes a $5,000 bonus and COLA for state employees, unless you're an elected official. As you know, we pulled those out, believing, like many of you in the Senate did, and the House agreed with us, that leaders eat last, and that while a COLA might be appropriate, a bonus simply was not. The budget also includes increases in public safety that were approved by this body. The $5,000 originally in DJJ and Department of Corrections, but also $2,000 supplementing that pay on top of it that we hope to be able to hold into the FY23 budget as well. Those numbers were specific because we wanted to address the exceptionally high turnover that we've seen in those agencies. Your priorities are also recognized in Department of Behavioral Health on respite care, Kate's Club, Broken Shackle, and also in the Department of Human Services budget on after-school programming and in adaptive sports and DOE, in the DECAL program, Summer Nutritious Program. One of the areas that we did have a disagreement with the House and were able to work out was on skilled nursing facilities. There was an insistence on this body that any increase would go into quality payments to make sure we were reducing pressure ulcers, antipsychotic medications, and other things like that. We were able to hold the Senate's position on the quality language, and I appreciate your help to get there. You'll see that we also reached a deal on airport aid, rural downtown developments, and transportation support for the IIJA program, which we understand Congress now is going to fund. While the Senate position was originally at $189 million, the House position was zero. We were able to compromise in the middle, leaving $100 million to provide a local state match for that, or a state match rather, for that program. A few last-minute additions that the Senate was able to support in conference, or would support with your vote in conference, was $150,000 for the Public Safety Officer Support Program for canine therapy dogs, which has been championed by our First Lady. Also $2 million for integrated precision agriculture, which has been championed by the Senator from the 20th. $8.5 million in addition to the Governor's Emergency Fund for public safety needs that we see coming that could be over multiple years in the future. And we also were able to, because of the Senate's original ad, thanks to the Senator from the 27th, to add monies for additional funding for school nurses. The Governor saw that proposal and picked it up for all other school staff as well, an increase of $2,000 for all those staff. The Governor also made a move that I think is extremely prudent in putting a 13th payment into debt service. It really will help us as we move forward into uncertain times, secure the financial stability of the state. That's a highlight of the proposals. Many of them are things you've seen over the past few weeks. You were integrally involved in being a part of them. I want to thank you again for your support, for your comments, for the extreme efforts you took to represent your district, and also want to thank the Senate budget staff for their help in getting to where we are today. If you don't mind, please give them a round of applause too. Last but certainly not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the House Chairman. Well, before that, I want to thank Office of Planning and Budget Director Farr, as he helped us navigate these waters. He's been extremely helpful through this budget, which again we've seen over the past few months go up and down, particularly over the past 36 months. And then last but not least, I need to make sure we thank the Chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. As you know, Chairman England announced he is not going to return to this body, and I told you last time that while that's a loss for the House, it's also a loss for this entire building and a loss for the Senate. His fingertips and his touches will be on this budget for many years to come. The hearts that he's affected, the lives he's affected will be evident for many, many years to come after this, and really appreciate the leadership that he's provided as well as the mentorship he's provided to the Senate Budget Office after the passing of Senator Hill, the previous senator from the 4th. Mr. President, if there are no questions, I'll yield the well and ask for favorable consideration to the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 910.
You do have a question. Chair recognizes the senator from the 34th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Senator Yeo.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it not true that the leaders eat last, and we've been eating last for the past 20 years that I've been here?
Senator, that's very true, but I haven't seen that statement change yet.
Thank you, Senator.
You have no more questions.
Thank you so much. I urge your favorable consideration.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the motion? The chair sees none. The senator from the 19th has moved that the Senate agree to the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 910. All those in favor vote yea, opposed nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the motion, the yeas are 52, the nays are 0, and the Senate has agreed to the House amendment to the Senate substitute to House Bill 910. I want to echo the Appropriations Chairman's comments about your staff with the Budget Office. Melody and her entire team's done a great job. And now y'all get about an hour off before we start working on the fiscal year 2023 budget. So, Chair recognizes the Appropriations Chairman.
Mr. President, I would rise to make a motion that the Senate immediately transmit House Bill 910 to the House.
The Appropriations Chairman has moved that the Senate immediately transmit House Bill 910 to the House. Is there objection? The Chair hears none, and it is immediately transmitted to our friends on the other side. We're now moving on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 586?
Senate Bill 586, a bill by Senators Gooch of the 51st and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 2 of Article 3 of Chapter 4 of Title 32 of the OCGA relating to exercise by counties of power to contract for road projects generally so as to authorize the use of design-build contracting method by counties and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Transportation recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Ginn of the 47th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 51st to present Senate Bill 586.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Senate Bill 586 is a simple bill dealing with procurement. The term is known design build. It's something we passed here several years ago that allows the DOT to be able to put out for bid a project, let's say a road project or a bridge project. It would allow those contractors to hire the architect and do the design work and build the work themselves. That's already in current law. That's been used by the DOT for many years. It's working fine. This bill allows county governments to do the same thing. So that's the gist of the bill. I'll be happy to take any questions.
You have no questions. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against Senate Bill 586? The chair sees none. Is there objection or agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 37, the nays are 16. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 377?
Senate Bill 377, a bill by Senators Dugan of the 30th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Titles 20 and 50 of the OCGA relating to education and state government, respectively, so as to require state agencies, the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia, the State Board of Technical College System of Georgia, units of the University System of Georgia, units of the Technical College System of Georgia, local bills of education, and local school systems to take measures to prevent the use of curricula or training programs which act upon, promote, or encourage certain concepts and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Payne of the 54th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate The Senate Committee on Education and Youth offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 377, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Titles 20 and 50 of the OCGA relating to education and state government respectively so as to require state agencies, local boards of education, local school systems to take measures to prevent the use of curricula or training programs which act upon, promote, or encourage certain concepts and further purposes. Mr. President, Senator Halpern of the 39th and others offer the following amendment to amend the Senate Committee on Education and Youth substitute to Senate Bill 377 by deleting lines 99 through 100 and redesignating divisions 6 and 7 on lines 101 and 102 respectively as divisions 4 and 5. That completes the order, Mr. President. Additionally, there is a minority report that has been filed and is on your desks. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 50th to present Senate Bill 377.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise today to bring Senate Bill 377. This is a bill to require local boards of education and local school systems to take measures to prevent the use of curricula or training programs which promote divisive concepts. From the very beginning of this process, I pledged certain things. Number one, I pledged to conduct an inclusive dialogue. We've had 4 hearings. We've had multiple people come testify in those hearings from the public. I've had meetings with colleagues in this room on both sides of the aisle. We've had meetings with outside groups. And if you look at the original bill and the bill we have now, input from all the above led to the substitute and the current version of this bill. Number two, I pledged that this bill would not inhibit the teaching of history. And number three, we pledged to give parents a voice in classroom subject matter that strays outside the bounds of simply teaching historical facts. In order to make the intent of this legislation abundantly clear, we specifically defined 9 divisive concepts we believe should never be used in our children's classrooms. And I'm going to read those concepts, and I would encourage you all to read along to help understand the purpose of this bill. So if you're looking at the substitute on lines 23, divisive concept means any of the following concepts. A, one race or ethnicity is inherently superior to another race or ethnicity. B, the United States of America and the state of Georgia are fundamentally or systemically racist. C, an individual solely because of his or her race, skin color, or ethnicity is inherently racist or oppressive, whether consciously or subconsciously. D, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race, skin color, or ethnicity. E, an individual's moral character is inherently determined by his or her race, skin color, or ethnicity. F, an individual, because of his or her race, skin color, or ethnicity, bears responsibility for actions committed by other individuals of the same race, skin color, or ethnicity, whether past or present. G, an individual should feel demeaned or caused to feel guilt by a teacher because of the individual's race, skin color, or ethnicity. H, performance-based advancement or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or were created by individuals of a particular race to oppress individuals of another race. Or I, any form of race or ethnic scapegoating or race or ethnic stereotyping. And the purpose of those 9 divisive concepts was to make sure there was no ambiguity in what we were trying to do. So we further defined what race or ethnic scapegoating means. And it means, on line 41, assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or ethnicity or to an individual of a particular race or ethnicity because of his or her race or ethnicity. Such terms include, but is not limited to, any claim that an individual of a particular race or ethnicity is inherently racist or is inherently inclined to oppress others. We defined what race or ethnic stereotyping means on line 45. It means ascribing character traits, values, moral and ethical codes, privileges, status, or beliefs to a race or ethnicity or to an individual because of his or her race or ethnicity. So those are the concepts we define. Those are the concepts we believe should not be taught to our children. And in my opinion, there is no ambiguity there. But in order to address concerns that any part of that would be ambiguous, we took it a step further. And on line 66, laid out specifically that nothing in this code section should be construed to do any of the following. And I'd like to read, most importantly, I believe, line 76. Nothing in this code section shall be construed to prohibit the use of curriculum that addresses topics of slavery, racial or ethnic oppression, racial or ethnic segregation, or racial or ethnic discrimination, including topics relating to the enactment and enforcement of laws resulting in such oppression, segregation, and discrimination. So I've read the definitions of the divisive concepts. I've read what this bill was not intended to do and shall not be construed to do. And after reading those, it is very difficult for me to understand how so many people still misunderstand this bill. Or at least they say they misunderstand it. That goes to members in this chamber, it goes to residents, reporters. But fortunately, many media sources have done a good job reporting the bill accurately. I vividly remember learning about slavery, learning about segregation, about the KKK, about the Holocaust. And those are some of the most memorable days of learning that a student experiences. Those are the days when students learn just how deeply flawed people can be, how deeply flawed even government can be. And I'm among those who will tell you that those lessons are not just valuable, they are imperative. And our incredible teachers all across the state teach those lessons so eloquently, so memorably, while intertwining those hard-hitting truths with progress, triumphs, and sacrifices made along the way that gives us hope for our country, allows us to still believe that we, collectively, should be proud to be American, should be proud to be Georgians. And I believe that every single one of us in this room today understands our history and the ways it has shaped our present without having been taught that you inherited those burdens. That's what the bill does. That's what the bill doesn't do. And I want to shift gears now to talk about the second part of this bill, which is the complaint resolution process. So if you flip over and want to start on approximately lines 135, this bill requires that local boards of education adopt a complaint resolution policy. This policy, there's a list of individuals who would have standing to bring a complaint under that resolution policy. I understand there's an amendment that I have spoken with the senator from the 39th about, and I support that amendment. It changes this section briefly, and I'll let her address that when she presents her amendment. But it allows, for example, a parent to do a written complaint to a principal, and there's an appeal process. If the parent wants to appeal the principal, it goes to the local school superintendent. There's another level that goes to the local board of education. If they want to appeal further, it can go to the state board of education. If the state board of education makes certain findings, they'll submit those to the Department of Education. The Department of Education would make a corrective action plan, which would then be sent down to the school. And the school would have 30 days to implement that corrective action plan. After such time, if they have not complied with the corrective action plan, there would be discretion with the State Board of Education on suspending certain waivers that the school may qualify for at the time. Mr. President, I will yield for questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 41st with a question.
Senator, do you yield?
I do.
Senator, in line 24 and 25, under the definition of divisive concepts, one of the list it says that you can't say that the United States of America and the state of Georgia are fundamentally or systemically racist. Can you define systemically racist?
Systemically racist, I mean, systemically would be according to a fixed plan or system. So the system, the way the United States operates as a whole, you cannot teach that we collectively as a country or collectively as a state are racist.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that in your remarks you noted that you learned about racism and slavery as a child and, quote, learned, quote, how deeply flawed government can be?
Yes.
So do you further yield?
I do.
So in this understanding of how deeply flawed government can be, is government a system?
The system, the government system, yes, I would say so.
And do you further yield?
I do.
Is this system called the government flawed?
That is for you to interpret. Obviously, we are members of this body, and we have a good process. It's not perfect.
Do you further yield?
I do.
So also in your bill on line 78 and 79, this is under the list of things that we can talk about. So your bill says that we can talk about topics relating to the enactment and enforcement of laws resulting in such oppression, segregation, and discrimination.
That's correct.
Is not the fact that there are laws that exist in this country that have oppressed, segregated, and discriminated people not evidence of systemic racism?
I think I understand the point you're trying to make
It's the question
relating
I'm
those two, yes. And this has been talked about in committee hearings, and the point of this is right now a teacher should not be able to teach that the United States or the state of Georgia today as a whole is racist. Now, there's redlining rules, Jim Crow laws. Those are things that happened in the past, and those are things that should be brought up. But today, a teacher cannot say that the United States of America or the state of Georgia are fundamentally or systemically racist.
Do you continue to yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 36th to your left with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
I do.
I again would like to pose a fundamental question that has been asked many times. I'd love your answer to telling us where these practices are occurring now in our school system that require this massive bill that is being circulated around the country by members of your party in state after state. Where's the example in Georgia that we have to, what is it that we're trying to stop? Have we got a problem that this is solving? Do we have any evidence that this is occurring in our schools?
Thank you to the senator, and I think, to your point, 99.99% of Georgia teachers would not teach these divisive concepts. And I think 99.99% of them do not. But since the very beginning, that's been one of the biggest questions that I've gotten is,
right.
You know, where is the proof? Where do you see this? But I'll tell you, one of the things that was shocking and alarming to me throughout this process based on internet, emails, comments on social media is there are people who criticize this bill and say that these divisive concepts should be taught. And the fact that that rhetoric is out there, and the fact that there's 0.01% of the population that believe those divisive concepts should be taught in our school is argument for why this bill is ripe and why this bill why it is an appropriate time to bring this piece of legislation forward.
Do you further yield,
I
Senator?
do.
Line 76 through 79 that were referenced in the last exchange with the last questions raised from a senator. It would prohibit the use of curriculum that addresses topics of slavery, racial or ethnic oppression, racial or ethnic segregation, or racial or ethnic discrimination, including topics relating to the enactment and enforcement of laws resulting in such oppression, segregation, and discrimination. Can you explain that a bit further for us?
Yes, those are things that we do not want to prohibit. If you go up to line 66, it says nothing in this code section shall be construed to do any of the following, and that which you just read is what this bill is not intended to do.
So, lifting up an example, if I could give you an example, if the senator will yield for the question.
I will yield.
We've had, is it not true, studies that demonstrated that our Department of Transportation historically in Georgia had very low minority participation in terms of the contracts awarded by our state government Department of Transportation. Is it not true that that's a demonstration in our very recent history that we have, as a state and as a state policy that's been studied, we have demonstrated racial discrimination in Georgia's state policy very recently? Is that not the case?
Well, you know, Senator, I have not seen those studies. I trust the accuracy of those studies, but this bill would prevent someone from teaching that the state as a whole, the country as a whole, is racist.
So are you making, Senator, a distinction between as a whole or
systemically?
That's right. Just as that less than 1% of the teachers that you feel are Georgians that would embrace teaching divisive concepts calls for this sweeping, massive bill with more state apparatus involved and engaged in curbing something that's not happening in our schools?
I'm going to have to ask you to rephrase that because I couldn't follow that question.
Thank you. I was saying that, if you'll yield for this question, that you pointed to, did you not point to less than 1% of Georgians that believe that divisive concepts should be taught? And how does that less than 1% issue justify this bill, which massively involves government?
I understand, but to argue that because only 0.1% of teachers would even consider teaching that, I couldn't support that argument because I believe 0.1% of teachers would never have inappropriate relations with students, but we still have laws there to protect them.
Thank you for yielding. I want to repose that question about the Department of Transportation policies that were studied. The results being, is it not true that minority contractors had very little opportunity to participate in the contracts offered by the Department of Transportation? That the record is they showed exclusion of minority contractors to a very large extent. Isn't that true?
Well, like I said before, I haven't seen those studies, but I'm sure the senator knows of what she speaks.
But isn't it also true that that's a demonstration of a practice by our state in this present modern age that demonstrates a systemic approach to minority contractors' access to the state contract process? So would that be outlawed for a teacher to reference that?
Well, once again, I'm not aware of the studies you're talking about. I yield to you and say that I do know, I think you know what you're talking about for sure. But this bill is to prevent the teaching that the United States as a whole or the state of Georgia is racist.
Thank you for entertaining my question.
Do you continue to yield?
I'll yield for a few more, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 46th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, yield.
Senator, yes.
I'm intrigued by this argument that America or the state of Georgia have systemic laws that are racially discriminatory. Are you aware of any laws that are racially discriminatory? I'm thinking of the Voting Rights Act, which specifically protects racial minorities from unfair treatment, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I mean, back for the last 60 years now, it seems to me that our country has more laws preventing any kind of racial discrimination than creating a system or a legal framework for discrimination. Are there any laws you're aware of?
No, there are not. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 43rd with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
So, first, looking at line 75, could you please explain "and without endorsement"?
Without endorsement would be without you know, explaining that your personal agreement with a certain policy. You know, your endorsement.
Okay. Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes.
So you made a statement that if a teacher or person cannot say that the government or the state of Georgia is racist. Is it not true that this behavior should not be allowed or endorsed?
I'm going to have to ask you to rephrase that.
So you made a comment that a teacher or person cannot say that the state of Georgia or the government is racist. The question is, should this behavior not be allowed or endorsed?
So the line you're specifically referring to is that this bill would not prohibit the discussion of divisive concepts as part of a larger course of instruction in an objective manner and without endorsement. I think you can place in K through 12 education. We're not talking about colleges here. We're talking about K through 12 education. If there is a course regarding any of these divisive concepts, they could be taught in an objective manner without the personal or political beliefs of the professor, or excuse me, the teacher that's teaching it being taught to the students. These are children.
But my question is, if they are not allowed to teach it, it should not be allowed to be endorsed or tolerate the behavior. I'm not talking about classroom. I'm talking about, you said a person or teacher. So we're not talking about teacher, we're talking about a person. Should it not be allowed to be tolerated or endorsed, the behavior? The racist behavior.
So I'm trying to follow you. Are you saying that should these divisive concepts be allowed to be taught?
Should they allowed to be acted upon?
Well, I don't think any of these divisive concepts should be taught, and that's the purpose of this bill.
You're evading the question, but thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
I'll come back and close, Mr. President. I'll yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well.
Thank you.
And you will be afforded the opportunity to close the debate. Chair recognizes the minority leader to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I rise today in opposition to Senate Bill 377. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to inject some background information that I think is important as we discuss this bill. Because as many of you know, this bill didn't just float down from the clouds. It didn't just arrive fully formed in the minds of its sponsor or the governor. It is a part of a concerted effort that has been sweeping Republican-controlled legislatures across the country. You can trace the language in this bill back to an executive order that was issued by none other than President Trump in 2020. More than 40 bills were drafted in state legislatures around the country in 2021 that were modeled on the language in that executive order. And the bill we have before us today fits that model. As we have seen, most of these bills is centered on censorship of certain divisive concepts. That phrase and the subsequent definitions are taken from Trump's 2020 executive order, which included a list of prohibited divisive concepts related to sex and race and sex stereotyping, almost identical to those we see listed in Senate Bill 377. And what did the public think about the language of the executive order? According to PEN America, 160 trade associations and nonprofits, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, sent a letter to President Trump a few weeks after the executive order's adoption, asking him to withdraw it because it would create confusion and uncertainty. It would lead to non-meritorious investigations and hinder the ability of employers to implement critical programs to promote diversity and combat discrimination in the workplace. Trump's executive order and the many local bills like this one that were modeled on it arose in response to the widespread demonstrations that happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020. Institutions and schools took a hard look at their policies and began to adopt new curricula, training, and commitments to confront and dismantle racism. This provoked a backlash among far-right activists, and policymakers. And Senate Bill 377 is a direct product of that backlash. In other words, society is attempting, through hard conversations and a struggle to reckon with racism in the past and in the present. Reckonings aren't always pretty. Some people would just rather avoid the mess. Some people don't want that reckoning to occur at all. So if you'd rather not take a Democrat's word for it, maybe you would listen to Charlie Rugger of the Charles Koch Foundation, who said, gag orders threaten free expression, as they effectively argue that free speech and open inquiry are good only to the extent that those principles are applied in support of the ideas and questions lawmakers approve. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that academic freedom deserves the First Amendment protection, the right to teach, and the right to receive information. The First Amendment protects the right to share ideas, including the right of listeners to receive information and knowledge, even on complicated and sensitive topics such as race. When Senate Bill 377 claims are divisive concepts, what Senate Bill 377 claims are divisive concepts are actually the very concepts that are used to educate individuals on barriers and discrimination of people of color and other marginalized groups that still face these sorts of challenges. Educators and students have the right to discuss and learn about race, slavery, discrimination, American history, society, and culture. Senate Bill 377 also infringes on the rights of students to receive certain information about race and racism. All young people deserve to learn an inclusive and accurate history in schools. For students of color, the ability to learn about the experiences and viewpoints of people of color and America's legacy of racism is critical to feeling connected, free from censorship or discrimination. And this was said by Emerson Sykes. He's a staff attorney with the ACLU Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. There are so many topics that I can think of that will be lost if Senate Bill 377 is passed. For example, bans on interracial relationships. The landmark case of Loving versus Virginia, a case about two people in love, one black, one white. That case helped enumerate our current civil rights. It cannot be taught without addressing the context of racial inequality and segregation. The civil rights movement, for example, teaching students about the sit-ins and boycotts in Atlanta, in Savannah, and all across Georgia requires that students be taught about circumstances that activists were fighting, segregation and policies founded on the idea one race is inherently superior to another race. Senate Bill 377 creates an adversarial relationship between parents and students. Because of Senate Bill 377, the simple mention of race in the classroom could lead to a complicated process that disrupts learning and threatens the ability of schools to function. The fear of disruption and punishment is likely to have a chilling effect on open and honest discourse in the classroom. Let's not pit parents against teachers. Who ever heard of reprimanding a teacher for teaching our children? You reprimand teachers when they don't teach our children. One last point, Mr. President. Let me make mention of the fact that Arkansas Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson declined to sign similar legislation. He said the bill does not address any problem that exists, and the paperwork and manpower requirements are unnecessary. We should vote no on this bill. We should not be enshrining in Georgia law language that is racist in its origin and that has been rejected by the public at large and the business community specifically. We have opportunities and privileges because we hold these seats. We should be using them to help Georgians, to promote equality, to give the students and teachers of our state not only our support, but our trust. With that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Friends and colleagues, as many of you know, I'm somewhat of a history nerd and own a lot of books based on troubles throughout the history of our country. Divisive concept education is nothing new. It started in the late 1960s toward the end of the Vietnam War. It started when a lot of the anti-American protesters and others moved from the battlefields in front of our U.S. Capitol and in front of state houses around the United States, and they moved into the classrooms of universities and colleges as professors. And from there, they started pumping out these divisive concepts, preaching of what they thought were the evils that imperiled our country to absolute apocalyptic destruction at some point. Those who did not move into the classrooms were some of those notorious individuals who attempted to or who successfully set off explosives around the U.S. Capitol and other places throughout our country, and brought domestic terrorism to some of our friends on the West Coast and the East Coast. But those who made it into the colleges and universities promoted these issues. And once they had saturated our colleges and universities with it, they needed another place to go, so they took it down into our high schools and eventually our elementary schools. This is nothing new. The educational system that you and I succeeded in, that taught us, as the song went, reading and writing and arithmetic and those other important things that we needed to know to go out into the world and find our place into the world and seek the American dream, were pushed to the side so that divisive concepts could be taught in the classroom. And I experienced it fully a few months ago when a parent who has a child in a high school in Muskogee County sent me a video that I will be happy to share that was taught on Columbus Day and the discovery of America, with discovery in air quotes. And what it was is it was Native Americans giving the finger to an imaginary Christopher Columbus, saying, and I quote, "F Christopher Columbus." Of course, they were not just using the consonant to express their feelings about Christopher Columbus. I saw no value in this concept being taught in a classroom where a parent pays taxes and sends their child to learn the things that this young lady needed to go out and get into a good university and go to school. So I want to tell my friend from the 50th that I appreciate his courage, his strength for standing in this well and for working on this and taking the hot winds that he knew would be coming, taking them head on. Because if we don't today get our educational system back focused, true north, to where it needs to be, then we can continue suffering failing public schools, high unemployment rates for those who are unable to find jobs, and many, many other issues that come with a lack of a good quality education. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 39th to speak to the measure and her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak first to the bill, and I do rise in opposition to Senate Bill 377 because we are yet again spending time in this chamber on legislation that we don't need and that is part of a national agenda to force culture wars on our state legislature when we can be focused instead on solving real problems. And yet again, we are claiming to protect people who will actually be harmed. Are we protecting teachers with this bill? We know that the Georgia Association of Educators opposes it. We know that many teachers came in person to speak against this bill. Something that you may not recall is that we are experiencing a crisis in the field of education right now. The Professional Association of Georgia Educators survey found that 1/3 of our teachers say that they are unlikely to remain in the field in the next 5 years. And a majority of teachers in Georgia, some 60%, said that they would not recommend teaching as a career to someone else. They cited burnout, low salaries, and increased demands as primary reasons for their low morale. How does this bill address those issues? Instead, it adds to the threat of disciplinary action with reporting requirements and pressure to self-censor to our already overburdened teachers and administrators. Vague bans create fear among educators and will lead to more people leaving the field or deciding not to go into it to begin with when we need more teachers, especially teachers of color. And threats from the state will not encourage people to neither join or stay in teaching. Of course, I agree that students should not be instructed that one race is inherently superior, but we already have laws and processes to prevent that in our classroom. The language we need to, hold on. Sure, there's language in the bill that prohibits racial stereotyping, and typically this could protect students of all races, yet you'd only have to read the definitions to know which students are being shielded. SB 377 is a law that targets teachers, creates unnecessary burdens, and a pressure to self-censor, which can lead to students getting an incomplete view of history. I'm disturbed by this bill for many, many reasons, but overall, I find it to be pessimistic. It assumes that our teachers are not capable of handling difficult topics despite their training and ongoing professional development. And it assumes that our students do not have the tools nor the capacity to handle complicated, complex, and difficult discussions in an age-appropriate manner. And yet, aren't our schools an important part of where our children can learn these very tools, socio-emotional tools like empathy? Our teachers every day teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, but they're really teaching intellectual skills, critical skills, and an understanding that will give them psychological muscle. The most patriotic thing that we can do is not tell our students that we live in the greatest state or the greatest country in the world without equipping them with the abilities to make us better every year. Nothing that is being taught in our schools is about making kids feel responsible for what has happened in the past. It's about making them feel responsible for our future. We are writing America's story every day, including at this moment, and it's a story that we pass on to our children with every lesson. We should give them the tools to write a story that we can all be proud of. I can move on to my amendment now. I do really appreciate the author, the senator from the 50th, for his willingness to be open to this amendment. What this amendment does is it really only strikes 2 lines in the bill, lines 99 and 100. And those 2 lines deal specifically with the complaint resolution process, and specifically with district attorneys and the attorney general. There's no reason that we should be codifying into law the attorney general or the local district attorneys in educational complaint matters. We have avoided doing this in the past for many other bills related to complaint resolution, and there's already plentiful avenues in here for people to make complaints, including our parents, our students, school administrators, and it even leaves in members of this body. The matter of what we're teaching our kids really is not a criminal justice issue. So there's no provisions in this bill that would put teachers in jail or on trial for violating it. And so if no parent, teacher, or educator finds issue with what students are being taught, why would the viewpoint of the attorney general or district attorney matter? That is all. And I'm willing to take questions if there are any.
You don't appear to have any questions.
Thank you. I'll yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. This legislation doesn't solve any problems facing public schools in Georgia today, but it certainly will be successful at creating them. I'm looking at a jumble of words cut and pasted from the Heritage Foundation and a Trump executive order that doesn't ban discrimination or racial bias, but bans the discussion of it. This language is so vague and confusing, it's actually hard for me to pinpoint what the bill actually does. It lists 9 divisive concepts that can't be taught except when they can. That's right. This language is so vague, and the concept of not being able to teach about racism in the United States so extraordinary that the bill contains provisions that are contradictory to one another. It tries pretty hard to square that circle. You can teach about one sort of racism, but you can't teach about this kind of racism. You can teach about racism in laws and the economy, but not current racism in laws and the economy. This conflict creates a huge opaque area that NASA itself couldn't see through with its most powerful telescope. No one, not parents, not teachers or administrators, or the boards of education, and certainly not legislators, knows where that line is or is supposed to be, or if there is truly even a line at all. But there will still be consequences, bad ones, from passing a bill like this. Let's say a class is learning about how governments imposed residential segregation and how the banking system redlined in minority neighborhoods. This widespread discrimination slowed the accumulation of wealth of Black Americans and further segregated neighborhoods. Presumably, this particular lesson would be sanctioned by exception number 5, found on lines 76 through 79 of the bill. Less clear in the bill is whether the teacher can tell students about discriminatory practices in banking today. Can he or she explain that big banks like Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Citibank, and others have paid billions of dollars in settlements related to discriminatory lending practices within the last decade? Would such a lesson about modern day discriminatory lending practices violate the prohibition on teaching that the United States is systemically racist? Can a teacher say that in 2021, the Federal Reserve, our nation's central bank, conducted a racism and the economy seminar series to examine structural racism, its impacts, and ways to dismantle it? The U.S. Central Bank examining structural racism and ways to dismantle it. Is this endorsing divisive concept A? And the trouble is that even if the author thinks the answer is no, many parents will assume that the answer is yes. Now, let's think about another lesson being taught to a Black child in our schools. That Black child is sitting in a school named after a Confederate general who fought to uphold the institution of slavery in America. Or a Black child in one of the Georgia counties where the high school mascot is the Confederate rebels. That child can't be taught, according to 377, that someone should be demeaned because of their race. That's divisive concept G. But those examples are demeaning. You see the problem, right? We can demean, but we just can't teach it? Is that it? Parents who have now been primed by right-wing media to be on a scavenger hunt for anything with a whiff of a racial angle may complain about discussions of Black History Month, which recently did actually happen in Alabama, forcing their school superintendent to explain to their legislative education and youth committee that no, discussions of Black History Month are not critical race theory. But what about a conversation about Congressman John Lewis? What if a lesson about John Lewis, his fight against systemic racism, and for equal rights for Black Americans, and his walk across the Pettus Bridge and how he was beaten. What if that veers into a discussion about his support in his last years for the Black Lives Matter movement? Is that prohibited? Or does that fall into one of the exceptions? While not solving any problems, as actually admitted, because apparently we're now spending hours on quote-unquote problems affecting 0.01% of Georgians, the bill does create a host of new ones, because one thing it is sure to do is cause rampant confusion among parents, teachers, students, administrators, and the public. And the confusion will lead to complaints, and the complaints will lead to investigations, and the investigations lead to document production, which all takes up a lot of unnecessary time and trouble, energy, and money that ought to be focused on student achievement. It will also mean that conversations about difficult topics that really are truly best unpacked in an academic environment won't happen, which probably is the actual intent of the bill, to the extent that there is any intent other than as a campaign tool. Looking at the complex land and people that make up the United States of America, we can see that historically, the promise of opportunity and equality for all was undeniably not met. Our past has many examples of discrimination that had the effect of excluding Black Americans from opportunity, from slavery to the end of Reconstruction, when in 1868, Black legislators were expelled from this chamber, and one was not elected again until Leroy Johnson, not that many decades ago, were they? Expelled in 1868, no Black Georgians elected again to this room until our recent memory, our recent lifetime. To segregation and discrimination during the Jim Crow era, to efforts to block the reforms of the civil rights movement. Discrimination and efforts to push back on change did not stop there. After centuries of slavery and discrimination in the law, we have not eliminated racism or its vestiges from our society. And you see, the problem is that this bill demeans Black students by trying to pretend that racism was eliminated, as of, I guess, 1975, maybe. But you know who else we need to talk about demeaning? Teachers. Teachers will now have to decide if a lesson plan or simply answering a student question could elicit a complaint. When we're dealing with a teacher shortage like we have, and as the senator from the 39th already pointed out, over 30% of teachers said it's unlikely they'll stay in the field in a recent survey conducted by Page. I'd really be a lot more careful when we're facing a crisis like that about passing this rash of bills that demean teachers and educators. We should be supporting them, but this Republican Party is focused on micromanaging them, which adds insult to the injury of underfunding the schools by $10 billion over the past couple decades. Students are another casualty of the imaginary problem affecting 0.01% of people. It's actually our obligation to teach them the critical thinking skills they need, to give them context to understand our history and the reality of current events. Here's a hard fact for those 0.01% of aggravated Georgians. You cannot legislate away everything you don't like. Can't be done. Not every problem that crops up, not every discussion that pushes a little too hard is a matter for a 5-page bill. Children are curious about the world around them, and they hear, they see, they think, they talk to one another and to the adults that they rely on to guide them through towards adulthood. They need us, they need adults in their lives to help them navigate current events in a world where human beings far too often still fall well short of ideal. This bill seeks to intimidate, censor dialogue, and deny learning opportunities to children. Ultimately, I have no doubt that the censorship will fail. These are matters to be discussed, to be argued over, to be worked through. That's what we're talking about in this bill. Matters to be discussed and argued over in the push-pull and the ever-evolving American story on race relations and equality. It is not a matter to be legislated about. I'm a mom. I have 2 elementary school-age sons, and what I want for them is to have teachers who care about them and their progress. I really want them to learn critical thinking skills and to understand how to grapple with hard truths. I want them to understand our country's history, our world's history, related to things that are happy to understand and progress, and related to the hard things, the bad things that happened that made that very progress possible in the first place. I don't expect to agree with every concept that they are exposed to. Does any parent agree with every concept their child is exposed to? Hardly. That wouldn't be healthy. And it's certainly not realistic. I want them to hear different perspectives, and I trust that we can interweave our values with a whole and honest education. In that way, if my sons develop critical thinking skills, that's how they will be able to make the world that I want to send them out into a better world. And I don't just want this for my 2 sons. I want this for all of Georgia's children. So I urge a no vote on Senate Bill 377. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 46th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Certainly.
So do you want your children to be taught that one race or ethnicity is inherently superior to another race? Something along the lines of white supremacy?
No. I certainly did not say that.
You know this bill prevents that.
Well,
Senator, please give her time to answer the question.
What that would get into is you can't say this, but you can say that, which is very vague and confusing. And if you're talking about the divisive concepts listed, there are some that I do object to. Others are not objectionable.
Senator, further yield?
Certainly.
Do you want your children to be taught that an individual is inherently racist or oppressive due to their skin color or their race?
As I already said, there are some that are not objectionable and others that I find objectionable. And I object to the entire premise of the bill.
Will you further yield?
Yes.
Do you want your children to be taught that an individual's moral character is determined by his race or skin color?
Senator, I think I've answered the question. We can all read the bill. Let me just again say that at best, the bill is unnecessary. Even the author mentioned it's for 0.01% of troublesome discussions. And at worst, it will cause damage in a lack of students being able to be taught higher level critical thinking skills about very complicated events and laws in our nation's history.
Will you further yield? One
Sure.
final question.
Sure.
Do you realize that this bill prevents local boards of education or school superintendents from discriminating against students or their employees based on their race or skin color. It prevents these boards from discriminating.
Those, as you pointed out in an earlier line of questioning, that sort of discrimination is already outlawed under federal law and has been for a couple decades.
Thank you.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
I do.
So, is it not true that under the definition of divisive concept in this bill, it includes several concepts, one of which says on line 35 and 36 that a divisive concept means includes when an individual feels demeaned or caused to feel guilt by a teacher because of that individual's race, color, or ethnicity, that is included in a divisive concept.
Yes.
Is that not true?
Divisive concept G.
And do you remember a few days ago that I gave a point of personal privilege in which I described how I had talked to my now grown children about what it felt like to them when they learned Black history when they were young children? And that one of my children so insightfully told me that young children absorb stories, interpret stories as kind of good and evil. Lots of children's literature includes a hero and a villain.
It does.
And that indeed my children interpreted those stories that way and did not they felt guilty about being on the side of the evil or the oppressor. Do you
Yes,
remember me
I
talking
remember
about that?
Yes, I listened carefully to your remarks that day.
Right, they did feel that way.
Yes.
But then this bill goes on and says that nothing in this code section shall be construed to do any of the following. So it says that this bill shall not prohibit the use of curriculum that addresses topics of slavery, racial or ethnic oppression,
Yes.
racial or ethnic segregation, or racial or ethnic discrimination.
Yes.
And that my children, by the very process of learning about these things, did feel guilty. Is that not true?
That is true.
Now, does it appear to you that these two sections of these bills appear then contradictory?
I agree with you, Senator.
And that it's difficult for a teacher to determine what aspects of history being taught are going to make which children feel guilty? That's very difficult to determine.
I agree.
Will you further yield?
Yes.
Would you say then that this issue is better dealt with through proper training and curriculum that perhaps embraces this opportunity to teach analytical skills and to encourage the development of psychological muscle in children so that they can go out and be successful in the world that we live in?
I completely agree with you, Senator.
Thank
Very
you,
good
Senator.
point.
I yield.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 36th to your left with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I do.
Appreciate your delineation, isn't it true, of the issues and concerns that this bill raises were it to become law.
Yes.
There are 2 points, I believe, that could be made to illuminate the discussion that we're having. And one I will point out, we heard a colleague assert today that laws on our books, federal laws, the Voting Rights Act, public accommodations, those laws that were passed in the late 60s as a result of the civil rights movement. Isn't it true? We heard a colleague say that proves that we're not, don't have systemic racism in this country because those laws are in the books. But isn't it true that those laws are on the books to curb and cure practices of systemic racism that have existed throughout the history of this country?
That's true, Senator.
So it's somewhat difficult, isn't it true, to understand how the fact that we have passed civil rights laws, letting all citizens vote, letting all citizens take use of public accommodations, that in passing those, we were addressing the systemic racism and the practices of our government that needed to be
That's right, yes.
reformed.
Yeah, we had, of course, lots and lots of de jure segregation and racism, and that means, under law, governments imposing racist laws, yes,
Does the senator further yield?
I do.
You may or may not be aware, but I'd like to ask you if you know about this and if you're concerned about it. As you've pointed out potential damage that this bill could do were it to become law, are you aware that the College Board principals say that they will not grant advanced placement designation courses in schools that practice censorship?
I was not aware of that, Senator.
And the results of that, that I've been informed of, isn't it true, is that were that to be the case, censorship in an advanced placement class, censorship of what the teachers are able to teach, isn't it true that according to the College Board, they would not certify that class as an advanced placement class, and that further, isn't it true that they would not, when they turn in the records of the colleges, the advanced placement course could not be included in a school setting where they're banning or censoring teaching. So,
Senator knows of what she speaks.
isn't it true that even the threat, the possibility that we would risk having advanced placement classes decertified by the College Board really upset parents across this state that work mightily to get their children into advanced placement courses and that work mightily to get their school to qualify and get these courses certified. So why would we pass a bill that threatens the advanced placement courses in high schools across this state?
It's an excellent question. I can only hazard a guess since I'm not one of the signers. But as I mentioned, in trying to create a censoring, chilling effect on conversations and create some talking points for the campaign trail, we could do very real damage.
And just final question, if the senator will yield.
Yes.
Have you been hearing the voices of teachers across our state and the voices of teachers in your district and the schools in your district, some wonderful Atlanta public schools in your district? Have you been hearing the voices from them expressing great alarm at what this Senate bill does?
Oh, absolutely. I have, Senator.
And isn't it true that I, too, am hearing from teachers all across Atlanta saying, what are you doing down there to be censoring how teachers teach their curriculum?
I agree. I agree. I hear the same thing. And I will add that were I a teacher, this kind of nonsense is enough to make you throw your hands up and say, I'm done.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. President, I'll yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 22nd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill because it's a complete restriction on speech, obviously, without a doubt. Because it goes further than just the divisive concepts. Because if it sticks with the divisive concepts, quite frankly, the bill can be taken apart pretty easily. If there is no bill, if you stick to the divisive concepts. So therefore, you have to go beyond that. And in fact, on line 21, it talks about going beyond that, which is including views espousing such concepts, which makes it a very strict content restriction on speech. So let's kind of look at this. And we can just look at a couple of lines here. And this was really interesting drafting. But just changing a couple of words really changes the whole context of the bill, which then says, why do we even have it? So the United States of America, line 24, the United States of America and the state of Georgia are fundamentally or systemically racist. Why use the term racist? Why use that term? That term is one that inflames passions, is one that gets people riled up, so to speak. It's a term that's also not really quantifiable, and it's just difficult to define, and it gives persons wiggle room. So I think the term racist was used for that particular reason. It gives persons wiggle room on things like slavery, for instance. So I've heard conversations say, well, slavery wasn't racist because people in Africa had slaves. Of course, you don't understand actually that Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and that's a whole nother conversation that you really don't understand how all that worked. But slavery wasn't racist because there was this guy in Louisiana who was black and he had 2 slaves. Or slavery wasn't racist because the person who owned everybody, he willed them his property at the end of his life. And so it gives person wiggle room. But what if we just changed that word and said discriminatory? Discriminatory. And then what if we said was discriminatory inherently? Could we really argue with that? I believe even the author said that, yeah, there was a time where it was discriminatory. Because you can quantify that, because whether some Africans had slaves or whether some guy in Louisiana had a couple of slaves or whether a guy willed his property, it was discrimination. Forget about the argument about racist, it was discrimination. Because on one hand, you had persons who could marry and have children, and they were free. And on the other hand, you had persons who maybe were married, they were separated, they had children, they were born into bondage. Those children were born into bondage. That's discrimination. And then, if we was to say was inherently discriminatory, how could anybody argue with that? So no matter what the reason was that a person had these human bondage persons, it was discriminatory. It can't be argued with. No matter when you start, and then if you say was, you can't argue that there was a system in place that protected this discriminatory process. Forget racist, because that gets us all riled up and be like, well, this guy has some slaves, and that guy has some slaves, and this guy, he let his slaves go, whatever. Was it discrimination? The answer is yeah. Was there a system in place to protect it? The answer is yes. In fact, the author even kind of acknowledged that and said, yeah, there was a time. Then that brings us to this question. What do I have to cut off the time? So if the teacher says the United States of America and Georgia was at one time discriminatory, when do they have to cut it off? Does it have to be 1965? Does it have to be 1945? Does it have to be 1985? Does it have to be 2000? What year do they have to cut it off to come within the rubric of this particular statute? And at that point in time, that's when you know you have a complete restriction on speech. That's when you have a complete restriction on speech, because you have acknowledged that, yes, there was a time where the United States of America was discriminatory. And if a teacher says that, and he says, well, I mean up to today, you'll say, well, you can't say that. You can't use it up to today. So if a teacher says, the United States of America and Georgia was discriminatory up to today, you'll say, you can't say that. So the teacher says, well, which one can I say? 2000? 1990? 1955? What year do you want me to do? And at that time, you have total content restriction. That's where you're heading. You have no choice. But see, if you can change the nature of this bill that easily, then you also have no bill, because if a teacher can say that was inherently discriminatory, take out racist, take out now, was inherently discriminatory, you really don't have a bill. It really doesn't make any sense, because you're saying you're going to allow that to take place. So also clever drafting would be an individual, because this is what persons think we're talking about, but it's not clear. Let's look at number 20, line 26. It says an individual solely because of his race, skin color, ethnicity is inherently, let's change the word racist and go back to discriminatory, inherently discriminatory whether consciously or subconsciously. See, we believe we want to use, and this is where we get caught up at, we want to use the individual being the individual student. But what if I told you about a guy named Ben Tillman? Have you ever heard of the Hamburg Massacre? Hamburg Massacre happened right outside of Augusta, Georgia. It was African-American soldiers. They were soldiers. They were militiamen. They were doing on July 4th. They were engaged in July 4th activities. These were African-American soldiers. They were engaged in July 4th activities, and Benjamin Tillman and others whites decided that they were going to go over into Hamburg and basically start trouble. So when they did that, the soldiers, of course, tried to stop them. Courts weren't as congested as they are now, so Tillman and others immediately said that they were basically trying to impede their progress on a public street. So Tillman and others said that these African-American soldiers were trying to stop them from walking down a public street. They go to court like 4 days later. African-American soldiers go to court, and all of a sudden, a mob comes out and surrounds the courthouse. Surrounds the courthouse. The African-American soldiers fight back, but then the persons who surrounded the courthouse, they bring up a cannon and have to make them flee. When they flee, they're caught, and they're put in what's called a dead ring. And in that dead ring, they would basically pick out persons one by one and kill them, and 4 persons were murdered. An African-American state senator actually came to investigate what had taken place. When he got off the train, Benjamin Tillman and others captured him. And when they did that, he asked, could they tell his wife some things regarding his property? And then he was murdered. Benjamin Tillman never denied that he did it. In fact, he bragged about it. In fact, he said he would never apologize for what happened. In fact, he and another person who ran for governor against each other actually fought about who did most in the Hamburg massacre. I don't know Ben Tillman. He would later become governor, and he would sponsor many discriminatory practices. Could I not say that that individual was inherently discriminatory? Here's a man that brags about murder of African-American soldiers. Here's a man that creates discriminatory policies. Let's forget races, that triggers everybody. He creates discriminatory policies throughout his tenure. Could I not say that that individual, because of his race, he didn't do this because they were Democrats or Republicans, he did it because they were black, who murdered persons and bragged about it? Could I not say that he was inherently discriminatory? And if I can't, why can't I? What else would you describe him as other than inherently discriminatory based on those facts? That's where we are. And then we talk about the fact that we can say things without endorsement, line 74. We can actually teach all of this stuff, but not with endorsement. So what if I'm a teacher and I start telling our students about some things that human captives said? I really don't like using the word slaves because it's some innocuous now. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. But they were human beings who were captives. And what if I told a couple of stories about one human captive that talked about the fact that pregnant women, when they were punished, were placed in a pit in a way to protect her unborn child, but it was a way to make sure that the property of the master would be safe? What if I was to tell a story, which is true, I was to tell my students a story and say that one human captive described when he was being transported from the north to the south, that he would see families ripped apart, and that the screams he heard from the children and from their husbands and from the wives were maddening. And then what if I as a teacher said, students, that type of behavior has to be condemned, and we in the United States should never tolerate it? I've now endorsed something. I can't endorse basic humanity. I have to be neutral under this bill. I have to say there are both sides. I have to say that a woman who has a child who then becomes a human captive, I have to be neutral. I can't say I condemn that. Is that really where we are? And no rational person would say that you couldn't say that and shouldn't say that. No more than no rational person would say that we shouldn't condemn what happened to Jewish persons, that we shouldn't condemn what happened to Native Americans or anyone else. It's only to prove these political points which has been stated. And that's the travesty of this bill. Because when you change a couple of words, it boxes you in to where you say, well, yeah, you can say that. But then you have to go back and say, well, I got to stop you from saying that. But if I can't say that Ben Tillman is inherently discriminatory, and I can't condemn human captives being ripped from their families as a teacher, then where are we as a society? And that's why I've been preaching this all session. We're heading to some places that we don't want to go. With that, Mr. President, I will take any questions if there are any to have.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
Yes.
Senator, thank you for sharing those comments with us. Under this bill, what do you think a teacher would experience in the classroom if now potentially all of the students could potentially file a claim against her? How is that teacher going to feel if she was answering a question from a student, but she just happened to misspeak and link something current with what something may have been historical? How is that going to make her feel?
Well, definitely, that's where we go back to saying it's a restriction on speech, because that's exactly what it is, without a doubt. And I would also say something else about this, is that it's interesting that nothing else is covered. Sex isn't covered, gender isn't covered, and my point is, there's a lot of things that we talk about that are not civil in this society, but the only thing that covered is the one thing that we claim this bill wants to be. It wants to be raceless, it wants to be neutral, but the only thing that's covered is race. We have triggering conversations about sex, we have triggering conversations about sexual orientation, and I think this is the point that persons are making when they say it's a political choice. The only thing that we cover in here is race, and I wouldn't support anything else, but I just find it interesting that we've had some conversations that can make people uncomfortable as far as sex is concerned, sexual orientation. That's not covered. The only thing that's covered is race. The one thing that constantly in this country divides us is race. And that's the only thing that this bill touches. Very interesting.
Senator, further yield?
Yes.
Senator, let me direct you to lines 51 through 54 on this bill. And essentially in that part of this bill, the author said that they shall encourage such employees not to judge students or other employees or other individuals based on their race, color, or skin color, or ethnicity. Is that correct, Senator?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand that the basis that someone would have to make these judgments, because when you look down at the next line, line 55, it doesn't mandate any of that sensitivity training. It simply says that they may offer that training. Is that correct, Senator?
Yes.
How do you reconcile those two?
It's difficult to do because as you said, you can't do this, but how do you actually get trained not to do it? And that becomes sort of the problem. Allow the teachers to actually teach and have a battle of ideas, because that's the key. They should have a battle of ideas, and that's what should happen in the classroom. And let me say this. I get it on some level. A lot of us are put in boxes, but we should never stop speech. For instance, as an African-American man, for instance, I'm put as a box many times as being African-American men are misogynists or anti-LGBTQ. But I want you to think about this, how that rubs me very badly. Because the fact of the matter is, when I was a prosecutor, my case that I loved more than anything else was when a young woman came to me and there was a charge. It was a sexual charge, and everyone said, why are you even prosecuting that case? Men and women. This is before Me Too or anything like that. And everyone said, you can't win that case, you can't prosecute it. She had been a victim. And men and women said, you can't prosecute that. And we went forward on it. And that's the one case that sticks out more than anything. And then when we start talking about LGBTQ and African-American men, I got the award from Georgia Equality. And where persons said, do you think you need to advertise that? And I said, why not? So when persons put me in a box, it affects me. I get it. I get why somebody would say, I don't like somebody just saying white or racist or white this or white. I get it. But you battle them then in the marketplace of ideas. We don't cut off the speech. We do not cut off the speech.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield well.
Senator has yielded well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 9th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues.
So, SB 377, what we really need to talk about is the intent of this bill. And the intent of the bill is to censor and silence certain conversations that may make others feel embarrassed, to erase conversations about a dark history, and to not be able to unpack those conversations in a discussion, in an academic environment where there should always be academic freedom. And if we're going to start erasing those conversations, how does that impact my children or the history of my family as Americans? And we are Americans. And there are various realities that we're talking about in this country. And we are so diverse, and we all share different realities. But why does my reality have to be hidden where another one does not? And I'm going to share with you, a few stories that we would discuss in my family. This is our reality. And what if my child went to school and started talking about and asking questions about this reality? In my family, my grandmother grew up in Jim Crow, Alabama. She was not allowed to drink from certain water fountains. There was a black water fountain, and there was a white water fountain. She can tell you detailed stories about what that was like. She can tell you what it was like to be in fear, to be in certain towns, and you had to be out of them by sundown. That's the reality in my family. My uncle went to school during the 1950s, well, late 1960s. He was one of those brave students that would participate in sit-ins. He would recall stories about going into certain restaurants and being spat on, called names, threatened with his life. These are realities in my family. This is our history, and it's the history of many Black Americans. And why, if my child, if SB 377 was in existence, when my kids were in school or when I was in school, how would I be able to talk about that? To maybe ask my teacher or share a story about our American history, and trusted our educators would have a discussion about it, so that white students would understand too that this was a different reality for some. And I know these conversations, they're hard to hear. It's hard for me to hear them. But it is our history. Whether we like it or not, this is a part of America, the United States, the South. And there's nothing wrong with talking about accurate history. It's facing the truth. In history, that's what we're talking about. That's part of truth. And it's supposed to make us uncomfortable. It's supposed to elicit a feeling. It's supposed to make us feel disgusted. And it's supposed to do that so we don't repeat history, so that we learn and we become better humans and we learn how to treat each other better.
That's why we need to have these conversations. Why we should not be censoring these conversations in a classroom. Why can't we talk about, or why can't black children talk about how our ancestors came here, stacked side by sides in boats for months, like animals, with disease, shackled, no water, no food. Why can't we talk about that? Because it's because of that that one of my ancestors survived, that I'm standing here right now. Under those harsh conditions. Why can't we talk about that? Emory keeps the slave ship manifesto. I invite those of you in your free time to go take a look at those pictures. Share those pictures with your families. That's our history. That is us. That's who we are. That's who we were. And we teach history so that we don't become that again. Why can't we talk about the Tulsa Massacre? I didn't even learn that in school. I learned that probably not in grade school, probably when I got to college. And I did go to a predominantly white school. And sometimes certain histories were not taught. And it seems like we want to continue that. But why can't we talk about Tulsa? I've heard even from some of my, white friends that I love, they never even knew about the Tulsa Massacre. They had never heard the story before about how black people were murdered. Why can't we talk about the 1906 Atlanta race riot? What caused it? And under SB 377, none of this can be said or talked or discussed. When we can have open discussions about our history, it indicates or it promotes that we can do better. We cannot repeat history. And what are divisive concepts anyway? I see some vague outline of things we can and cannot talk about, but the bill does not fully explain in detail what teachers can and can't say. For instance, how do we, if a student comes and asks the teacher about the electoral college, what do we say about that? About the 3/5 human? How do we not talk about race in those type of conversations? We just had a bill here about the electoral college. So a teacher listening in her classroom, hearing that, and a student has a question, we can't talk about that now? This bill seeks to sell a false reality to our kids, and that the history of black students doesn't matter. And in essence, it is a censorship bill. It restricts our academic freedom. It promotes fear and intimidation in our educators. And it creates mistrust in our educators. And it's taken us down a dangerous path of authoritism. Here we are, we condemn Russia, we condemn China, but SB 377 is a censorship bill. It is telling us that it is infringing on our freedoms to have these type of discussions. And the bill itself proves that we have not even healed. The fact that even we have to have this bill shows us we haven't even healed from our past, because now we're trying not to talk about it. Let's hide it. Let's shuffle that under the rug. Because it makes people feel uncomfortable. And it's censorship bills like this that as we continue on this path, they are going to sacrifice our democratic values that make our country great. And we must be mindful of eroding democratic norms that we normally adhere to. Be mindful of measures that score temporary wins, but do irreparable harm to our democracy. So I ask you all here today, and I know some of my colleagues have left the room, and they're going to vote the way they want to vote anyway, and that's fine. I know your minds are already made up. But please be mindful of what we're eroding, what you're asking in this bill. What is the intent of this bill? It is a censorship bill. It vilifies our teachers. It tells one race over another, we can't talk about your history in a real way. I ask you to vote no on this bill. I think it's more divisive. I think it is going to create more problems than it seeks to solve, which I don't think it solves any, other than a political scoring point. So I ask you to please vote no on SB 377, and I yield for questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
Yes.
You referenced earlier something around violates academic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Can you outlaw for me some of the case law and academic freedom as it relates to K through 12 education?
Academic case law from the bill or academic case law?
No, what I'm getting
period?
at is.
I guess no, I can't outlaw academic
fair, that's
case
fair.
law.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Isn't it true that academic freedom exists fundamentally differently in the higher education realm than it does in K through 12 education, because we're educating adults as opposed to educating children, when children are required to be in the classroom in K through 12 education, whereas they're not in higher ed?
I would argue that it does not. Then we're saying that our kids are not capable of handling this type of information.
Well, the courts, would you continue to yield?
Yes.
The courts would disagree with you, and the original version of this bill included provisions around higher education, and those were removed specifically because of academic freedoms that are protected at the higher education level that are not. We tell teachers what to teach every day in K through 12 as a state and as a local board of education. Isn't that true?
That is correct.
So I just wanted to, with that in mind, could you help me understand what academic freedoms exist in K through 12 education that this bill violates, as you previously stated?
Okay, if we can't talk about slavery and the truth of slavery, and we're considering that divisive conversation, to me that is an academic freedom that we're not being allowed to talk about. I get what you're saying about higher education, but I would still again argue that this concept, or having real open conversations about truth and history, I believe our kids K through 12 can handle it.
Thank you. Do you continue to yield?
No, I don't.
Senator has yielded the well. Chair recognizes the senator from the 41st.